I was reborn. The first thing I did was place a bet. The bet was about how long Olivia would keep fawning over Jason. I chose 0 days and wagered an entire month's living expenses. It was hilarious. Someone actually picked 0 days. How is that even possible? Someone asked in disbelief after confirming the betting list. No way. That person turned out to be Olivia. The group chat exploded instantly. What kind of stunt is she pulling now? She suddenly doesn't like Jason anymore? She's probably just playing hard to get, right? I glanced at the messages. How could that be? Just yesterday, I was hopelessly in love, acting as if my world would collapse without Jason. And today, I suddenly didn't care anymore. It seemed like everyone believed that no matter what happened, even if the seas dried up and the rocks crumbled, I would never stop loving Jason, including my past self. Even I had believed it. But when they said, yesterday, they were referring to the 5th year of my marriage to Jason. That was the day he finally brought his lover in front of me, openly and shamelessly. He said he had long since grown tired of me. He said his lover deserved a proper title. I tapped the group admin and asked, "What are the odds?" The admin snapped out of it. "You don't decide that, time will tell." All right. Seeing my response, the admin couldn't help but nudge Jason again. So, what does the person involved think about Olivia's decision? Jason's stance was clear. Nothing could be better. At first, everyone treated it like some kind of joke, watching for amusement, but gradually they started feeling like something was off. I didn't bring Jason water when he played basketball. I didn't rush to apply medicine when he got injured. I didn't volunteer to do his assignments when homework was assigned. In fact, except for classes, where I had no choice, I completely avoided places where he was. It was as if my words, "I won't fawn over Jason anymore," were slowly becoming reality. Yet no one believed I would actually let go of him, including my roommate. Before our calculus lecture, she gently nudged me. "Olivia, the seat next to Jason is empty. Do you want to sit there?" Before, it didn't matter if his seat was empty or not. I'd always find a way to sit beside him. I shook my head. "I'm not going." My roommate glanced at Jason's seat again, looking a bit surprised. A really pretty girl was about to sit next to him, and he actually turned her down. "Is he waiting for you to go over?" Hearing that, I instinctively looked in that direction. The girl had a pitifully wronged expression, her eyes filled with disappointment. She was indeed beautiful, exactly his type. This was odd. Back in college, the seat next to Jason was never empty. He had a good-looking face, always drawing the attention of girls, and he never turned them down. Why the sudden change? I was about to look away when his gaze met mine. His eyes held a vague, unreadable curiosity. I averted my gaze and pulled out my book. My roommate touched her nose awkwardly and stopped talking, because we both knew just how much Jason despised me. If he could, he'd probably stick a "Olivia, keep away" sign on himself. There was no way he deliberately left a seat open for me. I stared at the formulas on the board and lowered my head to do calculations. Jason didn't like attending class. Sure enough, after roll call, he found an excuse to slip out. If there was one class I absolutely hated in college, it was PE. To have more common topics with Jason, I signed up for women's basketball, but I never actually liked it. My shots were always off. I never really fit in with the other students. I constantly tripped and stumbled, collecting bruises left and right. Yet back then, I accepted it willingly. I could spend an entire afternoon doing nothing but picking up basketballs for him. As long as I could see him, I felt content. Looking back now, I realized just how foolish I was. I jumped and threw the basketball outward. It hit the backboard and bounced away. Helpless, I jogged over to pick it up. The guys playing with Jason saw me and immediately started mocking in their usual tone. "Look, Olivia's here again. Told you she couldn't possibly give up on Jason. Olivia's back to picking up your ball again, Jason." I ignored them and walked to the bushes, picking up the ball that had gotten a little dirt on it. I had no idea how I had thrown it so far out of bounds. Holding the ball, I walked back. "I swear, I wasn't here for you," someone joked. "Jason, Olivia really doesn't like you anymore." Jason didn't say anything at first. It took a while before he finally spoke, his tone unreadable. "Olivia came to pick up my ball." I didn't respond and kept walking forward. But before I could take a few more steps, the ball was slapped out of my hands, bouncing a couple of times before rolling back into the bushes. I turned and saw Jason standing in front of me. He lowered his gaze, looking down at me, his long eyelashes casting shadows over his eyes. In the sunlight, he gave off the illusion of someone deeply affectionate. I used to fall for that look all the time. But after so long, I knew it was just my own illusion. His voice carried a hint of impatience. "Olivia, if you're not picking up my ball today, then don't ever do it again." I glanced around at the pairs of eyes waiting for drama to unfold, then lifted my head and met his gaze. "Don't act like my kindness toward you is some kind of privilege you're granting me," I said slowly, enunciating each word. "Jason, I don't like you anymore." He was momentarily stunned, then let out a mocking laugh. "What kind of game is this?" His voice carried amusement. "Do you even believe your own words?" As annoying as he was, I understood why he thought this way. After all, I had liked him since high school, always chasing after him, following him everywhere. Even if I had said before that I didn't like him anymore, out of every 5 times I said it, 3 times I would still come running back the moment he crooked his finger and gave me an excuse. But this time was different, because whatever I owed him in my past life, I had already repaid in full. Why wouldn't I believe it? I said. "Fine, I'll swear on it." I raised my hand, holding up 3 fingers. "I swear, if Olivia ever likes Jason again, then may Jason's entire body rot away." Jason's face stiffened. His lips pressed together into a straight line. He probably realized that the Olivia who once adored him would never dare to make such a vicious oath about him. After all, in the past, even the smallest scratch or bruise on him would break my heart. Unless I truly no longer liked him. I turned away and ran to retrieve the ball from the bushes. As I passed Jason again, a girl was stepping toward him with small, hesitant steps. Her voice was soft, as if she had gathered all her courage just to speak. Can I add you on social media?" I glanced at her. It was a shame. Jason never liked shy, timid girls. His type had always been someone bold and striking, like Vivian. But this time, surprisingly, Jason responded differently. His voice was warm, almost intimate. "Sure." Hearing that, I curled my lips into a slight smirk. So, maybe some things really were different in this lifetime. I walked away without looking back. For a long time after that, Jason and I were nothing more than strangers, passing by each other as if we had never met. Until one day, I was invited to help tutor the failing students in calculus, one of only 2 people in the class who had scored a perfect grade. When I glanced at the list of students, my stomach twisted. Jason's name was there. If I had a choice, I would have preferred to go my entire college life without acknowledging his existence. Thankfully, I wasn't the only one with a perfect score. The other top student was someone named Ryan Lang. Seeing the name, a faint image surfaced in my memory, a face that was calm and distant. I had a vague impression of him, but not much. In my past life, I had been so obsessed with Jason that I barely remembered anyone else in our class, let alone a male classmate. I searched the class group chat for Ryan's contact and sent him a friend request. To my surprise, he accepted almost immediately. I sent him a message. "Are you available to help tutor the failing students?" "Did you know?" Ryan replied with a simple, "Yeah." Straight to the point. "Can you do me a favor? One of the students assigned to my group, can I switch with you?" Almost at the same time, he responded. "Jason." Seeing his reply, I was slightly surprised. Ryan Lang was the kind of guy who excelled in academics and had a striking appearance, someone who won competitions in various subjects effortlessly. In my eyes, he never seemed like the type to pay attention to gossip. Then again, maybe I had been such an infamous lovesick fool that even someone like him had heard about it. "All right, I'll treat you to a meal another day." I meant it as a polite gesture, but unexpectedly, he agreed right away. "Sure. Let's do it after the tutoring session." Then he even sent an emoji, a gif of a little dog shaking its head in a playful manner. He actually seemed happy about it. On the day of the tutoring session, it was the first time I really took a good look at Ryan's features. He looked completely different from Jason. Jason always had a careless, almost lazy demeanor, with a smirk that made it seem like he wasn't serious about anything. Yet, that very attitude somehow made him irresistibly attractive. Ryan, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. His features were sharp, his expression always calm and composed. When he explained problems, he did it with precision, methodically breaking things down. I noticed a few girls sneaking glances at him 4 or 5 times, hesitating as if they wanted to say something. But every single time, their words were cut off by his straightforward question, "Did you not understand?" I couldn't help but laugh. It was so blunt, so ridiculously oblivious that I actually let out a chuckle. Before I could cough to cover it up, Ryan's gaze met mine. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a faint smile appear at the corner of his lips. Before I could tell if I was imagining it, someone suddenly sat down next to me with a loud bang as they slammed their hand against the desk, making everyone turn to look. I turned and saw Jason. I had thought he wouldn't show up. Class was almost over. Yet here he was. "Damn it," he scowled. "I don't understand this problem." Jason pulled out his textbook, pointing at a triple integral problem. I clenched my jaw, suspecting he was doing this on purpose. The professor already said the exam won't cover triple integrals. The key points had been highlighted in the group chat, but some people just didn't bother to check. He had always been like this, even in our past life, skipping class whenever he felt like it, never paying attention to review materials. Then, right before exams, he'd come to me, asking me to mark the important questions for him. He would scrape by, passing each time by memorizing answers last minute. Jason lazily lifted his eyes, then suddenly leaned in closer. His breath brushed against my ear, carrying a teasing warmth. "Olivia, help me mark the key topics, okay?" If it were before, forget just his tone. Even just him leaning in like this would have made my heart race. But now, nothing. My heart remained completely still. I instinctively moved away. "You're not in my group. If you have a question, don't ask me." I kept my tone flat. Besides, how would I know what's going to be on the test? Just as I finished speaking, a shadow loomed over me. A crisp, minty scent surrounded me, subtly cool yet distinct. A calm voice spoke, steady and composed. "If you have a question, you can ask me." I turned my head slightly and saw Ryan standing there. His words were firm, carrying a quiet authority. Jason abruptly stood up, pointing at Ryan as his voice took on an unmistakable edge. "So this is why you've been ignoring me? Because of him?" The tension in the air thickened, as if a fire had just been lit. Jason's gaze held more than just confrontation. It carried something else, something almost wounded. Ryan, however, remained utterly unbothered. "Just because you don't study doesn't mean others don't need to." His voice was even, unwavering. "If you want to argue, do it outside." Jason's irrational behavior left me exhausted. Time ticked by. Only 10 minutes remained until the session ended. I just wanted to finish and leave as soon as possible. I glanced at Ryan. Fortunately, he didn't seem irritated by the misunderstanding. If anything, his expression toward Jason carried a hint of contempt, as if Jason wasn't even worth his time. Jason's gaze flickered between Ryan and me. Then he turned to look at me again. Jason's voice was uncharacteristically soft. "Olivia, didn't you say you wanted to eat at Morning Grill? Let's go together." For a moment, I couldn't read the person standing in front of me. I had mentioned wanting to eat at Morning Grill before, but he had never once offered to take me. Every time, he would brush it off with a lazy, "Maybe when I have time." Yet I had seen him take Vivian there. The two of them had sat by the window, leaning close, his eyes filled with indulgent affection. After that, I never ate barbecue again at any restaurant. "No need." Jason's brows furrowed. He gritted his teeth and spat out, "Fine, don't regret it," before storming off. By the time the tutoring session ended, I packed up my books slowly. When I finally looked up, I noticed Ryan standing by the door. It seemed like he was waiting for me. Suddenly, I remembered I had promised to treat him to dinner. "Let's go." Ryan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I didn't know you didn't eat at Morning Grill. I had already made a reservation earlier, and they just told me over the phone that it's non-refundable." Seeing the slight guilt on his face, I felt a bit bad. If I counted my past life, it had probably been 7 years since I last had barbecue. "It's fine, let's just go." Somehow fate worked in strange ways, because the restaurant he had booked was the exact one I had once longed to eat at, but never did. As soon as we stepped inside, the rich, smoky aroma of grilled meat filled the air. Under the sizzling sound of meat cooking, Ryan seemed less distant, more approachable. His slender, pale hands moved with practiced ease as he placed pieces of perfectly grilled meat onto my plate. Then he set down the tongs, resting his chin on his hands as he watched me expectantly. "Try it." Under his steady gaze, I picked up a piece of meat and placed it in my mouth. I had to admit, he was really good at grilling. The fatty edges had a slight crispness to them, while the lean parts remained incredibly tender. As I took a bite, the rich juices mixed with cumin and burst onto my tongue. I narrowed my eyes slightly, savoring the taste. "It's good." Ryan nodded in agreement, taking a sip of water before speaking again. "So giving up something you love just because of someone you dislike? Don't you think that's a waste?" He emphasized the word "someone you dislike," as if making a point. I was a little surprised. I looked up at him across the grill. Maybe it was just the lighting, but his eyes seemed to hold a hidden sparkle, like a star caught in the night sky. His sharp, refined features were especially striking in this moment. "Yeah," I admitted, "it really wasn't worth it." Saying that, I took another bite, more out of frustration than hunger. Ryan's lips curved into a smile, open and unrestrained. That day was the last before winter break. To be honest, I didn't really want to go home. Ever since my parents passed away in a car accident, the house had always been empty. And in my past life, on my way home, I had encountered a knife-wielding maniac. I could still remember the sensation of warm blood gushing from my stomach when the blade pierced me. That alley had become my nightmare. I kept delaying my trip home, but eventually, the final day to stay on campus arrived. Dragging my suitcase, I walked through that familiar alley. Even though the sun was shining brightly, I couldn't stop trembling. It felt like someone was following me, footsteps that didn't belong to me, growing closer, step by step. Maybe it wasn't just my imagination. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps behind me remained unhurried, yet steadily closing in. At that moment, my heart stopped. Was my death in this lifetime, arriving 7 years early? Panicked, my fingers fumbled for the pepper spray in my bag. As I turned the corner, I pressed down on the nozzle without hesitation. "Are you okay?" A familiar voice made my hand freeze mid-motion. My heartbeat, which had been hammering in terror, gradually slowed. I opened my tightly shut eyes. It was Ryan. He looked a little disheveled, but before I could fully register his presence, I realized I had just sprayed him in the face. Droplets clung to his eyelashes, his eyes squeezed shut from the irritation. His brows furrowed so tightly they could probably crush a mosquito. And yet, despite all that, his first reaction had been to ask if I was okay. I hadn't expected that. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Frantically, I dug through my bag, pulling out tissues. I wiped his face haphazardly with a tissue. "What are you even doing here?" I had to admit, no matter how disheveled he looked, a good-looking person always carried a certain kind of appeal. His hair was damp, strands sticking to his forehead, adding a rugged, almost untamed beauty to his features. "I live here," Ryan replied after a pause, his eyes still squinting from the spray. "You live here?" That was odd. I had never heard of him living around here. He must have noticed my confusion because he added, "I just moved in recently." I hesitated for a moment before blurting out, "Then, can I visit you during winter break?" The words slipped out before I could think. Maybe it was because I had always been lonely. I was just about to clarify that I didn't mean anything by it, but before I could, Ryan smiled. "I'd like that." For a split second, my heart skipped a beat. Over winter break, Ryan and I met up for meals a few times. Each time, he insisted on walking me to my doorstep. At first, his presence right behind me felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling, but over time, I began to feel a strange sense of security. He was truly different from Jason. Ryan didn't care much for entertainment or pointless gossip. Every conversation we had would naturally drift toward academics. Somehow, I started finding his enthusiasm for competitions and study topics surprisingly engaging. Maybe it was the way his eyes lit up every time he spoke about them. It was infectious. One day, he asked if I wanted to attend a seminar on academic competitions at the start of the new semester. Without even thinking, I agreed. Before I knew it, winter break was over. On the day of the seminar, I sat in my seat with my notebook, waiting for Ryan to return from printing some materials. Unexpectedly, I saw Jason walk in holding a girl's hand. His gaze flicked toward me briefly before he quickly looked away, as if he couldn't care less. His head tilted down as he whispered something to the girl beside him, making her giggle uncontrollably. It was strange. I had once kept this person in my heart for so many years, yet for all this time, I hadn't thought about him even once. If he hadn't shown up in front of me today, I might have even forgotten how long I had loved him. But what was he doing here? Jason never cared about studying. I turned my attention to the girl with him and finally understood. She looked familiar. She was the same girl from last semester, the one who had asked for his contact information. She had her hair tied up in a high ponytail, looking fresh and energetic. So Jason could change for someone. "Let's sit closer to the front," the girl suggested sweetly. Jason, however, refused. "We'll just sit here." With that, he pulled her into the seat right in front of me. After sitting down, Jason leaned in and whispered something to her. I could clearly see the red creeping up her ears. "Stop it," she whined playfully, her voice soft, carrying a hint of pleading. I didn't catch the rest of their conversation, but whatever he said made her face turn even redder. I sighed. I didn't care to listen to them flirt, but unfortunately, sitting this close, I had no choice. Thankfully, Ryan returned just then, slightly out of breath as he took a seat beside me. He must have hurried back. Without a word, he handed me a bottle of water, already opened. "Did you wait long?" I shook my head, taking the bottle from him. Almost at the same time, the chatter in front of me abruptly stopped. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Jason's expression shift. His side profile was noticeably tense, his face darkened. Ryan placed the printed materials on the table and leaned in slightly. I highlighted the key points from the seminar. "Let's go over them together." His voice was calm, steady. He pulled out his notes, where different sections were neatly marked in various colors. I let myself focus on him, listening intently as he broke down the details. A sudden clatter from the front row interrupted us. A pen had dropped to the floor. Only then did I realize, somehow, Ryan and I had ended up sitting very close to each other. So close that when I turned my head, his lips brushed against my cheek. A wave of heat rushed to my face. I could hear the frantic beating of my heart, completely out of rhythm. I had no idea what to do. I quickly muttered, "Let's finish the discussion after the seminar." Ryan let out a soft hum in agreement. The professor's voice soon filled the room as the seminar officially began. Afterward, as always, Ryan insisted on walking me back to my dorm. He seemed oddly persistent about making sure I got home safely. As I reached the entrance, he hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something. "Olivia," I looked at him questioningly. But then, he simply lowered his head and smiled. "It's nothing." I knew what he wanted to ask, but at that moment, I had no answer to give him. When I turned around, I caught sight of Jason standing in the corner. His eyes were red, as if he had been standing there for a long time watching me and Ryan. I didn't stop. Without looking back, I walked straight to my dorm. Jason started acting strangely after that. Even before I got to my seat the next morning, I saw a bottle of milk and a boiled egg placed neatly on my desk. Without hesitation, I picked them up and tossed them straight into the trash. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jason watching. Unexpectedly, he didn't get angry. For someone as impatient as him, he barely reacted, only pulling the corners of his lips into a half-hearted smirk. "Jason, you're such a good guy." "But she doesn't care at all." Someone in the classroom sneered. "Damn, looks like things have shifted. Did you two make a bet or something? I thought Olivia was supposed to be the one chasing after you. How come it's the other way around now?" The person speaking had barely finished their sentence when Jason, who had been calm just a second ago, suddenly lost it. He shoved the guy to the ground and threw a punch. "Shut the f up," he roared. "She's not some pathetic fool." Watching the absurdity of it all, I curled my lips into a mocking smile. How ironic. He was the one who had always treated me like a lovesick fool. Who was he trying to put on a show for now? Day after day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner were all delivered to my desk without fail. That was when I realized Jason was doing what I had once done for him. I could only take so much. Watching perfectly good food get wasted again and again, I finally snapped. "Jason, you have a girlfriend." The moment he heard that, he suddenly laughed. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, as if he had been expecting me to say that. "I knew you'd care about this." He said it so naturally, as if he was sure I would never truly leave him. Then, with a casual smirk, he added, I don't like her. I was just trying to make you uncomfortable, and we already broke up. I stared at him, completely dumbfounded, not just by his shamelessness, but by the fact that I had once wasted years of my life loving someone like this. He continued, I get it now. The only reason you've been acting this way is because you were never given the response you wanted. But now I'll give it to you. We still have a chance. For the first time, I raised my hand and slapped him across the face. Whoever ends up as your girlfriend is the unluckiest person alive. His form of affection, if it could even be called that, was nothing but a way to reopen old wounds. I stared at his face, reddened from my slap, and spoke each word clearly. So I'm begging you, just stop. Loving him had cost too much. I suddenly remembered the night I had died in my past life. He had been at a hotel just a few blocks away, and yet he hadn't even bothered to check if I was alive. Now he wanted me to believe that just turning my back was enough to make him care? What a joke. For a few days, things finally quieted down. Then, in the middle of the night, my phone suddenly rang. I groggily reached for it and glanced at the caller ID. Ryan? That was odd. I picked up, but the voice on the other end wasn't his. Hey, is this Olivia? I immediately sat up. Where's Ryan? There was some rustling before a muffled voice, Ryan's voice, came through the speaker, slurred and unclear. The person on the other end chuckled. He's drunk. Aren't you his girlfriend? If you have time, come pick him up. My brows furrowed. I tossed and turned in bed, debating whether I should go. But in the end, I couldn't shake the thought that if I left him there, he might actually get kidnapped and have his kidneys stolen. With that in mind, I quickly got up and threw on some clothes. When I arrived at the bar, my heart finally settled. Ryan was still upright, though his eyes were dazed. He wasn't completely unconscious. His gaze was fixed on the entrance. And the moment he saw me, his lips curled into a grin. He tilted his head back slightly, looking up at me. As I got closer, I could finally make out the finer details of his face. His sharp nose, his strong jawline, lower still, his long, slender neck. The faint blue veins beneath his pale skin were barely visible, the scent of alcohol mixed with his usual light mint fragrance. A memory stirred in my mind. I had seen him like this before. It had been so long ago that the image had faded from my memories. But now, standing here, the past and the present seemed to overlap. Back in my past life, after graduation, I had attended a class reunion. At that time, I was already with Jason. What surprised me was that Ryan, who had been overseas, had come all the way back just to attend our class reunion. And even more unexpected, he had been drinking quite a bit. When the bottle spun and landed on him again, he chose truth. Someone beside him laughed and teased. Then let's ask our aloof class president, did you ever like anyone during college? Another person chimed in, I bet not. If he did, they'd be together by now. Come on, Ryan was too busy planning his future abroad. Where would he find the time for romance? Just then, Jason's hand covered mine, his fingers slotting perfectly between mine. I was caught off guard, but at the same time, a small sense of warmth filled my chest. Ryan, completely unfazed by their teasing, let out a small chuckle. I did. My heart skipped a beat. This had nothing to do with me, yet I suddenly felt nervous. The group erupted with excitement, urging him to say more. As if the situation wasn't already suspenseful enough, Ryan casually added, She's here right now. The grip on my palm tightened slightly. I lifted my head in confusion, glancing at Jason. But before I could react further, Jason reached out with his other hand, covering my eyes. Everything turned dark, and with it, my thoughts, my heartbeat, everything else fell into silence. Looking back now, the signs had always been there. Ryan had been giving me hints all along, but at this moment Ryan was still drunk. I called his name once. Ryan? When he didn't respond, I called him again. Ryan. This time, he hummed in acknowledgement, then leaned in closer. He was so near that I could feel his warm breath against my skin. His Adam's apple bobbed slightly as he swallowed. Was it me? I asked. He seemed to know exactly what I was about to say. His voice was steady, carrying a faint trace of alcohol, but his eyes, they were completely serious. He leaned in a little more. So, do you still want to run? I knew that the man in front of me was slowly invading my space. Yet, I couldn't move. Not until I felt his lips press against my warm and firm. My heart jolted, as if skipping a beat. As the scent of alcohol clung to me as well, I finally realized Ryan's eyes were bright, crystal clear, without a trace of drunkenness. It was as if he was saying, "Olivia, you can't run anymore." I hadn't even finished speaking when Ryan's fingers gently brushed against my palm, his expression slightly fragile, like a delicate porcelain doll that could break with the slightest touch. "Don't reject me." His voice was soft, yet firm. I raised my arms, wrapping them around his neck. I didn't know who moved first. By the time it was over, his lips were slightly flushed, stained with a color that didn't belong to him. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. If I didn't like him, then how could I explain the fact that I had deliberately put on lipstick before coming here? What I didn't expect was for one of Jason's ex-girlfriends to come looking for me. Her eyes were red, bloodshot from crying. "Can you go see Jason?" she asked. I frowned slightly. "Why?" She swallowed hard before answering. "He got into a car accident. He's unconscious." Hearing the word accident, tears finally spilled from her eyes as she choked on a sob. "He kept calling your name." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Her voice trembled. "He drank a lot and went to your dorm, but then he saw you hugging another guy." She paused before continuing. "I've never seen him like that before. He curled up on the ground, shaking, crying, saying you didn't want him anymore. Someone like him, someone who always acted so untouchable. He was crying so hard." I listened, but all I felt was emptiness. I tried to imagine Jason crying for someone, for me. But no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't picture it. Because every time I cried, all he ever said was, "Crying won't solve anything." How could someone like him possibly cry? The girl's tears dripped onto the floor, her face full of guilt. "He didn't let me follow him," she sobbed. "And then I heard about his accident. It's all my fault." She clutched my arm tightly, her grip desperate. "Please, Olivia, can you go see him?" I pulled out a tissue and handed it to her, my voice calm and firm. "This has nothing to do with you." Seeing her dazed expression, I repeated, "His accident has nothing to do with you." Then I added, "I won't go see him." The girl's eyes widened slightly. "You really don't love him anymore?" I nodded lightly. "Because I want to love myself first." She stood there for a moment, stunned, before finally turning and walking away. The next time I saw Jason, I was shocked. It was like he had become a completely different person. His complexion was pale, his jawline shadowed with faint stubble, and dark circles were deeply set under his eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen him look so exhausted, so unkempt. "I got into a car accident." I didn't know what to say, so I simply hummed in acknowledgement. His gaze was filled with accusation and frustration, his voice hoarse as he said, "You didn't come to see me." He stepped forward and stubbornly grasped the hem of my shirt. "Do you need something?" Looking at his face, I felt nothing, no pain, no regret, no lingering attachment. Somewhere along the way, I had unknowingly started seeing him as just another stranger. "I saved you." As if sensing that I was about to leave, his grip tightened just slightly, careful, hesitant, almost pleading. Hearing his words, my mind drifted back to high school, to the very beginning, when I had first fallen for him. Back then, my parents had just passed away. My world had been pitch black. Day after day, I went to school like a wind-up doll, mechanically attending classes without really absorbing anything. My grades plummeted. Before I knew it, I had become a target. A few troublemakers had set their sights on me, saying that since I had no parents, even if I was bullied, no one would stand up for me. To them, I was the perfect victim. That was when Jason appeared. He had kicked over the desk surrounding me, bold and reckless, his presence overwhelming. He had told them, "If you mess with Olivia, you mess with me." Then he had turned to me, his voice gentle. "Don't be afraid, I'll protect you." Before that moment, he and I had barely been more than acquaintances, classmates who exchanged occasional nods in the hallway. I never would have expected him to stand up for me. My heart had pounded violently in my chest, his face glowing in the sunlight like something out of a dream. Jason's parents were both lawyers. The moment he spoke, no one dared to lay a hand on me again. Back then, he had been the only light in my dark world. I chased after him, clinging to his words like they were sacred. I made his future my own, throwing myself into my studies with everything I had. I had believed that one day, If I worked hard enough, I would be able to reach my light. But light was never something that could be caught. By the time Jason got to college, something in him changed. He rebelled against his parents, refused to listen to anyone who told him what was best for him. Somewhere along the way, he started seeing me as nothing more than a nuisance, someone he couldn't shake off. And yet, I had still loved him. How could someone who had once been so kind, so dazzling, change just like that? I stared at his hand clutching mine. There were faint bruises on the back of his wrist, the marks from IV drips still visible. "Convert it into money," I said slowly. "I'll pay you back." In my past life, I had already repaid everything I owed him. In this life, I refused to use my feelings to pay off any more debts. Jason's lips parted, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. It took a long time before he finally muttered, "That's not what I meant." He hesitated, then cautiously asked, "Can you promise me one thing?" Then, as if afraid I would reject him immediately, he quickly added, "I swear it won't put you in a difficult position." I stared at him for a long time before finally nodding. I never expected Jason to take me to a Ferris wheel. In front of us, a girl giggled sweetly as she held onto her boyfriend's arm. They say that if a couple reaches the top together, they'll stay together forever. She looked at him playfully. "You better cherish me, okay?" The boy pulled the girl into his arms. "Of course." Unlike the romantic atmosphere between couples, Jason and I didn't say a single word. I had once told him I wanted to ride a Ferris wheel. He had laughed and called it a childish game for little girls. After that, I lost interest in things like this. Now I felt nothing. When we got off the Ferris wheel, I asked Jason, "What's next on your plan?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my arm and pulled me back toward the entrance. "Let's ride it again." The staff member was momentarily surprised but quickly smiled knowingly. "You two will definitely last forever." I recalled what Jason had said when we talked about divorce. His voice had been so cold, devoid of any warmth. "It takes two people to be together, but only one person needs to decide to break up." That was what he had said. It takes two people to be together. So then, what were we now? Even if we rode this Ferris wheel 100 times, Jason and I would never last forever. As we reached the top again, his voice suddenly choked. "So there's really no chance?" He crouched down, hugging my legs. I couldn't see his face, only the strong, sculpted back that now seemed so fragile. "I was wrong, Olivia." His voice trembled. "I just realized, I really do love you." Looking at him now, I finally felt at peace. At this moment, it was as if I could look back at my past self, the one who had once been so desperate, that so willing to sink into the dirt for him, and whisper, "It's over." All the betrayal, all the resentment I had buried deep inside me. It was over. Just as I was about to leave the amusement park, I saw Ryan standing at the entrance. I didn't know how long he had been waiting. When he saw me, he smiled and naturally reached for my hand. "Let's go home." Jason wanted to say something, but his gaze was fixed on our tightly interlocked fingers. His voice was low. "I shouldn't have used someone else's feelings." Then he paused before adding, "But I really did care about you." Ryan wasn't behaving. Out of sight from Jason, he lightly scratched the palm of my hand, teasing me. I glared at him, but he suddenly leaned in and kissed my cheek. "You can keep talking," he said, looking at Jason, "but my girlfriend's time is limited." Then he turned his head, facing Jason directly. He did it on purpose. He wanted Jason to see. Jason's voice was hoarse. "So you really love him?" I nodded. "Yes." No matter how much pain I had gone through, I would never deceive someone's feelings. Jason let out a bitter laugh. It took him a long time before he finally turned away. "I understand." The sunlight stretched his shadow long across the pavement, but no matter how bright it was, it couldn't erase the gloom that surrounded him. Now, it was just me and Ryan. He suddenly tugged on my hand. "Let's ride the Ferris wheel again." I stared at the ride, which was just reaching its peak from the previous round. I felt a headache coming on. Why was everyone so obsessed with Ferris wheels today? But since it was Ryan, I was willing to indulge him. We boarded together, and then out of nowhere, I blurted out a question. "Why do you like me?" Ryan let out a soft sigh, then pulled me into his arms. "I'll tell you in the bonus chapter." On the way home, I suddenly received a money transfer from the group admin, $100,000. I was stunned. The admin messaged me, "It's all from Jason." 50 times the payout. He bet his entire life on it. Reading that, I felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. Who gave him the confidence to think I'd love him forever? He deserved to lose. I accepted the transfer, then tightly held on to Ryan's hand. In the distance, the sun was shining brightly. Bookmark, go back, and right beside me was the person I truly loved. Bonus chapter, Ryan's perspective. The first time I noticed Olivia was because she couldn't run fast. She had this defiant smile on her face, but she was slow. I'm a marathon runner, I had thought to myself. She must be blind to think she can outrun me. Before I could say anything, I looked ahead and saw a middle-aged man with a balding head clutching a purse. He was cursing under his breath. Just my damn luck. Damn it, why is he so fast? I quickly realized this was a robbery. Without hesitation, I called the police and took off running after him. By the time we tackled the man to the ground, the girl finally turned to me with a smile. Beads of sweat glistened on her face under the sunlight, making her look especially vibrant. Thanks. We were both taken to the police station to give our statements. Her mother arrived soon after, her face still pale with fear. Olivia, you nearly scared me to death. Don't be so reckless next time. Hey, what's more important, your bag or your life? It was only then that I learned her name, Olivia. She grinned mischievously, looking fearless. But I'm fine, aren't I? Her mother sighed, then turned to me. Thank you so much. If it weren't for you, this little troublemaker might have been kidnapped. Olivia pouted in defiance. No way, I'm about to start high school. I lowered my head and smiled, feeling a little embarrassed. It was nothing. I thought of Olivia from time to time after that, but for a long while, I didn't see her again. The city was big. Running into someone again wasn't so easy. But I never expected that I really would see her again. Same university, same major. But she was nothing like before. The bold, lively grin was gone. Every action seemed cautious, careful, as if she were walking on eggshells. She bumped into me once and apologized at least 5 times, panic flashing across her face. Fearful, anxious, insecure. This wasn't the Olivia I remembered. She didn't recognize me. Just as I was about to say hello, she turned in another direction, a bright smile on her face. Jason, I brought your favorite cut of meat. So she had someone she liked. Later, I overheard from somewhere that Olivia's parents had died in a car accident. I couldn't process it for a long time. She was supposed to be someone who was always happy. By the time I wanted to get close to her again, Jason had already noticed. His eyes were filled with a possessiveness so deep that I knew I had no place there, so I let it go. As long as she was happy, that was enough. Before I left the country, I heard they were getting married. I received the wedding invitation and instinctively declined. I couldn't stand the thought of watching the girl I loved hold someone else's hand, promising forever. Through a video someone sent me, I saw her smiling, radiant with joy. This is good, I told myself. This is enough. Then I saw the message in the group chat. She was gone. The attacker had been caught on the spot, but Olivia, she wasn't coming back. I took the first flight home. At the funeral, Jason was kneeling on the ground. His face was devoid of life, as if he was ready to follow her at any moment. He was swaying, barely able to hold himself up. I stepped forward and looked at her picture, speaking softly. She loved reunions. Don't go disturbing her family now. How did Jason deserve to be with her? He was the one who had failed to protect her. Tears dripped onto the ground from his face. I couldn't see his expression, only hear the muffled, broken sobs spilling from his lips. I stared at her photo in the center of the hall. In that moment, I felt nothing. But if I had another chance, I would save her.